So I've worked on MODX since 2010 on client projects. I come from Malta, but now I'm living in Amsterdam. I work at Springbok Agency. We're a digital media company with branches in Amsterdam and Belgium. I've developed a keen interest in SEO since 2011, mostly on technical, and I love to travel. So I'm not sure if anyone had any client who came to him and told him, I don't want my website to rank. Anybody had? No? Okay, so that's good. So this will be useful to us. So first, a brief introduction to how search works, because it's important to know that when you do a search on the web, you're actually not doing a live search. Whether it's Google, whether it's Yandex, Bing, Yahoo, you're actually searching the search engine's index of the web, or as much as it can find. So that is why it's important that we actually make sure that our pages are discoverable. It starts with a spider, so basic things. It goes to a web page, it finds the links, it goes to other pages, and it starts building its database of your clients' pages like this, making them discoverable. So if I search MODX in Google or in Yandex or whatever search engine you're using, the search engine will do a search into the pages it found. It will find those which are relevant, which will run to thousands, sometimes millions, for such a broad term. And it will retrieve the pages which it determines to be most relevant. And that is why today, that is what we will be going through today. It scans each page for a number of factors, based on which it determines on whether it's technical, if it's content, on authority. Checks for offsite signals, like links. We hear a lot about link building and their importance. And it presents to us a page with all the results. All this in under a second, which is great. In my opinion, there are three pillars of SEO. There's the technology part, which I will be covering today during my presentation. There's the relevance, which deals mostly with the content on the page. And there's also the authority. The authority is how many links point to your page, how old is your domain, if it's a well-known brand, and other factors. I will be covering these topics with regards to technical SEO, a brief introduction to hosting, going on to meta information. This is the code you place in your head. Proceeding to page speed, which is very important, especially for users. Going up to the HTML markup of the page. And as well going further to page statuses. When your page is returned, whether it returns a 301, 302, a 404, a 200 OK message. One thing to keep in mind, in my opinion, is that you should always optimize for the user. SEO should be a byproduct. So when choosing a host, these are important points to keep in mind. You need a bandwidth. You need to serve the page fast. I'm aware that nowadays bandwidth is actually very cheap, but surprisingly enough, you still find people who actually use a shared hosting with very limited bandwidth. Considering that our pages nowadays are very rich in media content, like serving videos and images, we need to ensure that we have good bandwidth, especially if we have a considerable amount of people. We have to ensure the uptime. Many hosts today guarantee more than 99% uptime. Again, if you're using a shared hosting, this can go down. It can damage your SEO if, for example, the crawler search engine it goes into your page while your page is down. You might easily get de-indexed, and that will harm your rankability for the site. The allocated CPU and RAM, again, it will affect how fast it can render the page. Important, the IP address, both the neighborhood, that is for sites that are hosting within the same server, as well as the history, because it might be the case that you acquire a new host and you are given an IP which has a bad history that could be blacklisted. So that's something you should check, even if you get a dedicated IP for yourself. It usually you will notice because the client will start complaining that the mails are receiving in the junk. Then you should just do a quick MX scan and you will find it. Configuration. This is my preferred configuration using Nginx, PHP 7, MariaDB, and HTTP2. These operate at different levels. I think Nginx, PHP 7, and MariaDB render the page server side very fast, and HTTP2 allows you to serve assets much faster concurrently rather than using HTTP 1.1. And I think actually these are very quick wins to do, which helps you render the page speed faster. SSL, today should be a default. In fact, even Google is promoting secure by default. There are even free SSL nowadays, usually through Let's Encrypt, and many hosts provided by default. Anybody who uses Cloudflare also provides free SSL if you can set it through there. And something which few people do actually is to enable the HSTS on the site. HSTS basically preloads the HTTPS within Chrome. So, because what happens is when you pull a request, your request is still exposed. So with HSTS, the browser ensures that the request is going over HTTPS and location. So if your clients are in USA, if you get a server in Europe, in Frankfurt, the latency will be higher. So you should always target to get a server nearest to your niche target. We will tackle this later on when we also see into languages. So, meta information. Meta information is basically information on the page which the user will never see rendered. I'm going to go through the SERP snippet. SERP snippet is how your result shows on Google when you search. Canonicalization, basically telling Google or the search engine that the page is a copy of another copy. Language handling. Pagination, something which is actually very rarely implemented, as well as social. Because although search engines don't put social as a ranking factor, in my opinion, the more social engagement you have on your post, I've seen results on it actually that it does affect. So, search snippet, we can see a screenshot at the top. Basically, that is how Google shows and most other search engines. You have the page title, you have the URL, which maybe not many users are conscious about, but it does help to indicate what the page is about, especially if you are presenting, it doesn't show there, but especially if presenting a PDF, for example, or a doc, you would see it in the extension, and the meta description. And on the left-hand side, we see how it shows through our code. So it's through the inclusion of the title tag and through the inclusion of the meta description tag. So basically, there are two main reasons why you should have a good page title and a good meta description. A good page title and meta description will increase the click-through rankings, because when you're on Google, you're competing actually against a number of other results. You're competing against people who put adverts, against other people who are doing SEO, and also against Google rich snippets. So you need to make sure that your page title and the meta description look good. There's also, people tend to scroll, so people will go usually to the first or second result, and when they don't find what they are looking for, they will scroll through the page. So even if you are on position 7, position 8, that still will increase your chance of click-through rate, as well as on-page signals. Because the more the keyword you are targeting appears across the page, like in the title and meta description, you're increasing the chance because you're telling the scroller what your page is about. These are some tips on optimizing. We should keep the alias as short as possible. We should include the page title limited to 600 pixels, which is an average 11 keywords. And the meta description within 156 keywords, and as much as possible including action words and added value, like discover about our product, get free, something which will attract a click. The good part is we actually have an extra for that in MODX. It's SEO Pro. it gives indication. So instead of checking each time the length of the page title or checking each time the length of the meta description, with this extra you can actually see a preview. You should ask yourself, would I click on that result if I saw it? If your answer is yes, then all good. But if your answer is no, then you need to optimize. And this will also make the client conscious about Google seeing it in front, and also acknowledge the importance of having this. Moving on to canonicalization. Basically, canonicalization is used to tell the search engine that a page is a copy or has very similar content to another page. This is very important for several reasons. It's to preserve the crawl budget. So Google will not index all the pages at once. It might say, okay, for this website, I'm going to index 10 pages. So we want to maximize that crawl budget and make sure that he actually finds 10 pages which are relevant. Not he finds a copy of this page, then the print copy of this page, then the email copy of this page. So in that case, we do a canonicalization to the main page. We want to present the user the right pages. So we don't want to give the user the print version of the page, but we actually want to give him the right page. And it can also lead to large-scale duplication across the site, which decreases the rankability power at the domain level. So there's actually an extra called canonical. The only issue is it only works on symlinks. But then continuing on what Graham said, that's the power of MODX, because you create bespoke solutions, and you can easily add the canonical tag, either through a template variable, for example, where the user can specify if it's a canonical of each other. This would be hard to obtain through an extra, because it will vary from site to site. So, HREFLANG. I mentioned language handling. We do it through HREFLANG. Basically, HREFLANG is a signal to Google to indicate which language and country this copy of the page is about. It also helps to tell which page is an alternate to which. So in this case, this is an example. If we have the page MODX.com, for example, in English, we want to indicate that we have a copy, the exact copy of this page in Spanish for Spain, and in Spanish for Mexico, or Mexis for Mexico. Now, some people might ask, why did we specify Spanish for Spain and Spanish for Mexico? The reason is that we want to present region. So in Spain, for example, if I have an e-commerce website, I want to present my e-commerce in euros, in Spanish, and in Mexico they will have their own currency. So like that, it helps us to serve the right page in the right region. And we might also want to split our website on different TLDs and put them on different servers. So for example, if I have an e-commerce site which I'm targeting Australia, and I have an e-commerce site which is targeting Europe, I can have two websites which are duplicate of each other. You might decide to use different contexts, for example, to have them within the same MODX, but splitting the pages. So we'll put one copy of the website on a server in Australia, and we'll put one copy of the website on a server in Europe. And like that, we can use the HREFLANG to tell Google that a page is equivalent to its equivalent page on the other domain. There's a snippet for who uses Babel. It's called Babel translation. This is an example of how it can be implemented. But again, language handling is quite a bespoke, in my opinion, item in MODX. So that would be something that would be needed to implement by the developer. Going on to pagination. Basically, when you have listings like in a news site or in an e-commerce site with different products, we can use the pagination to indicate to Google that page 2 is actually not a copy of page 1, but it's actually a continuation of page 1. It's not a replacement for canonical, and it's not a replacement for HREFLANG. So it's important to know that all these texts can go together. In the case of listings, for example, it would be useful to use canonical on a page when a filter is selected. So if by default I have sort by date, then I set to, and I use the query string over there, and then I have sort by price, for example, it would be useful to use canonical for sort by page to point to the sort by date. Okay, why do we use pagination? Sometimes we see the scroll bar going too tiny for usability. It's also important for listing sites such as news sites, e-commerce sites, not to go over the 100 links per page. And to indicate to Google that actually page 2, page 3 is not actually a duplicate of page 1, but it's actually a continuation. Going on to social. Sometimes it can be the case that you share a link and you see maybe not the image you want and maybe not the text you want. You can actually control how the snippet shows on Facebook when sharing. This is an example which we implemented on the MODXpo website. It's called the Open Graph. We can find the tags on ogp.me. This is an example of how we implement it. It is not an alternative to the title. It is complementary on the page. And it will help you increase the click-through ratings when sharing. They're similar to Twitter. For Twitter, it's called Twitter cards. This is an example of implementation of the code for MODXpo site. And all this goes in the head part. Okay. Moving on to page speed. We're going to go through CSS and JS, redirects, compression, caching, and AMP, accelerated mobile pages. One question, how many of you have implemented AMP? Sorry? I will come to that. I don't think that AMP is directly a ranking factor, but okay. CSS and JS, these are some important stuff to do. Combination of files to reduce HTTP requests. We should put the CSS at the top and load the JS. I know there's a lot of discussion about this, not about the technology, but more about the implementation part of it. And this is a hot debate which comes often because many people are afraid of using JavaScript or using extensive JavaScript or going to AngularJS or going to other technologies. A good search engine will see what the user sees. We can actually see how the page renders on actual Google Webmaster Tools. We can check it. When it comes to Angular, I know there are some implementations which require some, which Google might find hard to index, but there are actually good solutions for it, so it's not an excuse not to use AngularJS. Redirects. This is something very important. I often go on a website and I do a check, and I see, for example, this case is modx.com. So if I type modx.com, it goes directly to https modx.com, which is actually, that's good, but sometimes I type, for example, mydomain.com, and I start seeing mydomain.com goes to www.mydomain.com to https, and you see something like 4 to 5 redirects. It's important that these are limited to 1, mostly 2 sometimes for HSTS implementation. And this is a tool which is free online, which you can check. Compression. Enabling gzip from server, minifying HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files to reduce any extra spaces. And it's important to compress the images. Caching. So in my opinion, MODX has a very good inbuilt caching system. But we can go further by our application, by calling cache snippets as much as possible. And also by enabling leverage browser caching from htaccess or true server, depends on the platform. Going to AMP, it stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages. It is a Google-backed product. Coming back to AMP, I don't believe that AMP itself, the technology, improves your ranking. The only thing I think is that since AMP is cached from Google and it's served faster, nowadays the Google index and the desktop index are separate. So I believe it will only help if your website loads slowly. And on the negative side, it has some limitations in markup. It will also take you more time to implement. So that's something that you would need to consider, whether you want to invest your time in actually making the whole site load faster or actually providing an AMP alternate. The one thing where I believe it's more useful than having a responsive fast site is when you actually have a new site. Because when you have a new site, like on the image on the left, it will render the listings at the top, usually if you have a good branded domain. So the good news is there's Minify X extra for it. This is an example of the implementation of it. I'm also aware that Sterk actually has a new plugin recently, yes, in September. I haven't given a try yet. Okay. Yeah. There's a plugin for Smashit. Whoever used Smashit before? Or Kraken? Or any other image optimization software? Okay. So basically, Smashit as an extra works with PTAM. It's an output modifier for it. I find Smashit actually very useful to compress images. It will help as well to load the images faster, of course. Going on to markup. So the header text, the H1, H2, H3, etc. This is something which is a bit of a hot topic. I see a lot of bad usage of this. Many people use it for aesthetic purposes. You find like H2s on keywords which are not relevant to the page, like in the footer. This is important that H1 is always the title. It should focus around the keyword on your page, and H2s should be used as subheadings. Structured data. How many of you have implemented structured data or are familiar with it? Okay. So basically, whenever you see a snippet with rich data, like this one, for example, which has ratings, or where you actually have the breadcrumbs showing, that's using schema.org or other markup. Basically, it's a way to indicate to Google better what your page contains as an information. This is an example of a breadcrumbs, for example, a simple one. At the top, we have normal HTML as we usually use, and underneath we have with the markup. So we can see that we define the item type at the top, schema.org/breadcrumbs list. There's a standard list which can actually be found from schema.org to apply on your markup. Going forward to the images, it's important to include an alt tag. It's not just for SEO, but even for accessibility purposes. The image name should be ideally alphanumeric with no spaces, not like we usually find with clients 1234556.jpg. And ideally, the image name should include the focus keyword, but we have to be careful not to overuse it and have the focus keyword everywhere. Going forward to links, we should have the title attribute, because that will actually indicate Google to which page what the keyword is going to be about for the following page. The anchor text, which is actually the text between the attribute. Important, the external links should be set to no follow, because if we set to follow, Google will flow through to the other sites, and we want to actually keep the crawler within our site. Of course, this doesn't apply for links that may benefit the client himself, like companies he withholds. And as highlighted before, there shouldn't be more than 100 links on a page. Responsive, I don't think I shouldn't even put a slide here, actually. It's very important that websites are responsive or mobile friendly nowadays. And the sitemap.xml and robots.txt. This is actually a very important thing. The sitemap.xml will allow Google to find pages which maybe didn't find through crawling, and the robots.txt will inform the crawler whether there's a sitemap placed in another location, and if there are any pages that the user doesn't want to crawl. Now we have to be careful, for example, not to disallow all the assets folder, because if we disallow all the assets folder, we are telling Google, don't crawl my images which are placed in there. So page status, 301, 302 redirects, and 404 pages. So the difference between 301 and 302 redirects, 301 is a permanent redirect and the 302 is moved temporarily. It's important that we have a 301 redirect. This is very important, for example, when we do a site migration and we actually, for example, have backlinks, links pointing to pages on our previous website. If we just do a new website, change the alias, all the benefit of those backlinks will be lost. So for example, when we move the site, we have to ensure that either we have the same alias, or we can set a directive through htaccess or through PHP or any other, to do a 301 redirect from the old alias to the new alias, to keep the previous benefits. 404 pages, okay, 404 easy, it's page not found. We have to be careful, but because I've seen actually pages, when you do 404 pages which return a 200 OK signal, that's actually not okay, because Google will index that page and you will end up with tons of pages indexed which you don't really want. And it can actually be used for negative SEO if I want to harm you. Okay, this may be the most interesting, my dog. And that's all I've got. Thank you. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions.
Может быть, есть вопросы у зрительного зала к нашему Стивену? А зрительный зал молчит. Ну что ж, Стивен, огромное спасибо. Есть вопрос. Пожалуйста, принесу микрофончик.
Do meta keywords have any value in SEO optimization? Meta keywords.
Yes.
Keywords.
Oh, meta keywords. Personally, I don't use them anymore. There are two reasons. I don't find that they do any effect. Number two, when I put the meta keywords, I'm actually telling the competitor which keywords I am targeting, and that's something I don't want to do. So, in my opinion, you shouldn't use keywords not simply because they don't do any effect, because you are also revealing to the competitor what keywords you are targeting on that page.
Okay, thanks.
Спасибо. Есть ли еще вопросы в зале?
Okay.
Стесняется задавать зал вопросов. Наверное, уже ждет кофе-паузу, я так думаю. Все-таки есть. Отлично.
In your opinion, what is the most important ranking factor? So if a client wanted to do one thing which would make the biggest difference, what would you recommend?
Optimize for the user. Because something which I didn't include in here, nowadays Google has a RankBrain algorithm. Who's familiar with RankBrain? Okay, we hear a lot nowadays, AI is becoming a buzzword, like bespoke. Yes, Google has RankBrain. Basically, it's taking into consideration things like bounce rate. So, for example, when you go on the SERP, on the Google, you do a search, you go on the page, and you hit back, Google records that. And Google sees that this user searched a keyword, went on this page, and came back because he didn't find what is relevant. So we need to ensure that we retain the user on our site as much as possible, reduce the bounce rate, increase the time duration. I don't think there is one single factor, but as I said, when you optimize for the user, you're optimizing for the search engine. So that would be one thing, optimize for the user.
Thank you. Еще вопросы? Желающие? Есть вопросы. Отлично.
How about pagination? Title on pagination or filter page?
About pagination?
Title on pagination page.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Заголовок на страницах и пагинации. Title on page.
Oh, for the pagination?
Yes, yes.
When it comes to pagination, we're actually using those tags. We're actually telling Google, listen, the next page is a continuing of the page. And Google will treat it the same. So page title and meta description for page 2, page 3, page 4, etc. can be the same as page 1. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Page 1, page 2.
The title? Yeah, you should focus on page 1. So set a title and a description for page 1. That can be the same for page 2, page 3, and page 4, and for the rest of the pages. Because when you use the page tag, you're actually telling that the next page is a continuation of the first page. And that way you are not running the risk of having duplicate page title and meta description on the page.
Thanks.
You were talking about putting all in one file, the GS and the CSS.
I mean one file for CSS and one file for JS.
Okay, so all the GS files in one file, and CSS, all CSS in one file. Is that correct, Dennis? Okay.
Yep, and ideally you minify them. Because that way, instead of having, for example, 6 JS files, which you actually have to load, you will just do one HTTP request and load one. It can be a bit hard, especially when you get jQuery conflicts. So it may be not something that we can just put an extra in and we're done. Sometimes the page actually breaks, and then it's your job as a developer to find out why.
In your last sheet, you were talking about negative SEO.
Correct.
What does that mean? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So basically, negative SEO is when I say, okay, I have a clothes shop, and you have a clothes shop. You are ranking above me, so instead of focusing on my website, I'm going to do things to make you look bad in Google's eyes. So in my slide, I pinpointed that some sites, their 404 pages, actually return a 200 HTTP status. And when you return 200 HTTP status, you're actually telling Google, this is a page. So what I can do, for example, I can include keywords like yourshop.com/bluefill. And I submit that to Google. Google will go, he types your domain.com/bluefill, finds that it actually has a 200, and he will see you as a shady site, for example. But in my opinion, there's a lot of other stuff you can do to try to hurt competitors, like you can start pointing backlinks from bad sites to your competitor site. But in my opinion, there are so many sites you would need to do it that it's better that you focus your budget, your effort on your own website. But that's what negative SEO is. I target you, and I will do everything to make you look bad in Google's eyes. Like point a lot of backlinks to your site which are spammy, try to submit your URLs which have bad keywords, and this kind of stuff.
Thank you. Еще вопросы у зала? Question. Ну что ж, походу у зала нет вопросов. Огромное спасибо, Стивен. Thank you very much. Аплодисменты Стивену.